This is a good job. It reminds me of a word, a Greek word, crisis, that does mean opportunity of change. It's a good thing to speak less, because you are forced to try to understand what is essential in what you are going to tell. You see, there is a title here, local construction technique, a double fold title. Local construction technique as a value memory, this is one topic, and practical suggestion for intervention is another topic. What is the relation between the securing intervention that we have seen with great detail with Caterina and Francesco and the local construction technique? Is there a relation or there is not a relation? Of course, the relation is present. I am going to refer obviously to the third point of the presentation of Caterina, and Caterina already has, how to say, told you about this, this difference in the fact that when we take a different time horizon as a reference for our intervention, we can have different level of intervention. So there is, I hope you appreciate the colors, okay? The short-term strategy, mid-term strategy, long-term strategy. And you see that there is a text in which we describe what are the essential features of these three different phases. I'm not going to talk about them in detail, but look that there are some key words in each of them: short-term preservation and security, mid-term strengthening, long-term restoration. Look, the relation between the constructional nature of the buildings of Poggioreale, or the buildings of a place that you want to intervene on, is in the fact that when you are talking about short-term strategy, you need only a basic knowledge about the feature of historical masonry construction, taking into account that masonry is different from reinforced concrete. This is a very basic level of information. And what is most essential in masonry structure, from the presentation of Francesco, it was implicitly contained. It has the low tensile strength, and so the inability to realize by itself some bilateral constraints. This is basic requirement. That is only what you need for the short-term strategy. But when you go to the mid-term strategy, long-term strategy, that's you are interested in entering the building, not only to avoid the collapse of the facade, but to enter the building, to make them safe for people to go inside and to look and to have a more complex experience, then you have to know the local technique. Otherwise, you cannot secure that local technique without destroying it. Okay? Some 10 years ago, I moved from Rome to Turin. I was initially really disoriented because there was a different language there, but not language. Now, we are lucky enough today because we can communicate in English, okay? But imagine that now I would start to speak in Italian. Probably many of you would have serious problems, okay, to understand. Now we speak English, so okay. We are lucky that no native English speakers are with us, because otherwise we could have serious difficulty in communicating. But we communicate. When I went in Turin, I had serious difficulties to understand what was the language of the construction in Turin. That is not the same language used in Rome. For example, the most dramatic example for me was the roof. The roof in Turin are built in a completely different way from the roof in Rome. And this is, how to say, it is impossible to understand a roof built by Filippo Juvarra if you try to interpret that roof thinking to Gian Lorenzo Bernini. By the way, have you ever heard about Gian Lorenzo Bernini? Not the Italian people. No? Okay. Michelangelo? Okay, there is a difference in language, okay? If we want to secure and strengthen the buildings of Poggioreale, we have to know the language of the building of Poggio Reale. Look, this is something that Caterina has showed you. I want just to show you that what is the difference. This is one of the blocks that you will see. Look, we have this, Caterina was showing you this block that is almost completely collapsed. Only one longitudinal wall is left with some transverse wall that act as buttresses, or this wall here that is also represented, look in that picture over there, and you will look this afternoon. So imagine that this wall here now is buttressing a longitudinal wall that is this one. Obviously, in order to allow this wall to act as a buttress for the other wall, you have to rely on the structural safety of that wall. And you need to do something. Here, this is the same level that Caterina and Francesco showed you. Here you see a more refined level, okay? Look, to do this kind of intervention, you are building a buttress to prop this wall. You are walling up this opening in order to reinforce that wall. This wall, reinforced in this way, can act as a buttress for an orthogonal wall, okay? To do this intervention, you don't need to know exactly the language of the Poggio Reale building. You need only to know what are the basic requirements of all historical masonry building, okay? And here, look, if you read carefully to this legend, you can understand what are the two basic requirements of every historical masonry building. First of all, the horizontality of layering of elements. Because if you read the third point, regularizing the first courses of existing masonry to rest the buttress. Whenever you want to build something or something else, you need to start from an horizontal surface. Okay? Look, these things could appear to be trivial. They are not trivial at all. And then you see another intervention, look at this with the number of two. Here. When you're going to build something, flanking something else, you need to tooth out. Tooth is an anthropomorphic metaphor. Okay? These are two, so you need to bond together the elements. Since the elements are not well connected in masonry, masonry is made of superimposed elements. And they work only because gravity is going to compact them. And so you need to improve the contacting of the elements. Then, let's go, these are the nice drawings of Giada Crementi. This is the sample block that is here that we're going also to study this afternoon and the following days. We have some problems, obviously. I hope you appreciate again the two colors, the swing short-term strategy. The brownish color that we mid-term strategy. To do this, you don't need to know exactly how Poggio Reale construction technique is made. Okay? But to make this, you need to know Poggio Reale technique. Otherwise, you are going to do some disaster. Okay? And I can go on because just to say, okay, I'm just exceeding out of the time, but just to say that this is a bilateral constraint, but it's not important. The essential thing is that when we are going here, a wall that is sagging, dramatically deformed, and that is partially collapsed here, okay, we can think, we can rebuild something. Okay, we can rebuild the entire portion, we can rebuild only the counterbolts on the extrudos. Okay, we can do this only if we know what is the original technique. Otherwise, this is not impossible. And so, this has been already explained. Okay, we have to know the constructional technique not only because we want to preserve it, but also because this is a useful memory for us, because it enables us to strengthen buildings while preserving them. This is a famous sentence by Giuffre. The Italian students know it very well. It can be used whenever you want, and you can find different reason of interest. Nowadays, the interest is in this space here. Only the weakest part of the building gives way to the earthquake. What does it mean? That you can speak a language with a good level or a bad level. There are good buildings and bad buildings. Are we able to distinguish what is a good building and what is a bad building? What are the parameters that we have to be able to assess? Here, the discussion would be very long, so I prefer not to show you all the slides that are missing here, because we can see the slides that I have here on site directly. But I wanted to share with you this obsession of mine. I am really obsessed with this triad, okay? And my students, my former students are perfectly aware of this. I don't know if I have learned this from Giuffre, if I have invented this. If Giuffre ever wrote this, Giuffre is our professor, a great scholar, Italian scholar. If Giuffre ever wrote this, but he could have written this. And when you want to judge the quality of a masonry building, you have to be able to say something about these three topics: structural layout, elements, connection. If you are not able to say something about these three topics, you cannot say that you know masonry building. For me, the most important is the structural layout, which is a topic in which I recently challenged a colleague of mine in Turin, an historian, telling him, are you able to find an historical architecture designed by a great architect that has not a good structural layout? Still the challenging is not concluded, but he has not found yet any historical building that has not a good structural layout. Here the structural layout is identified with the so-called box-like structure, but this is not the only way to realize an historical building. This is something that is typical in historical buildings. Okay? Historical buildings are made of masonry cells, and when I look at the fact that I built with masonry cells determine a certain type of, I would say, behaving against earthquakes. And here I hope that Giovanni Kanji will show us, because when I look at this building, you can see a crack here, and another crack, and another crack here. I remember that there is a nice kinematic mechanism drawn by Giovanni, which is exactly this. This is the most typical situation in historical masonry building. But in Poggioreale, there are some peculiar features. This is the own language of Poggioreale, and in Poggioreale, you don't have only masonry cell with four walls. You have masonry cells that sometimes are separated by an arcade. This is rather dangerous for for the seismic behavior, okay? Because these subtract some shear walls from the building. By the way, I have to make a present to Valentina Macca, who recently has studied a lot. Philippe de la Hire was a French scholar who in the 18th century studied the static of arches, and here she can see exactly the sliding mechanism of de la Hire, okay? So there is some peculiar of Poggioreale. This is something that you don't find in other contexts, okay? If you want to strengthen the building, you have to take into account this structural layout. Or you have to take into account the modification. This is true. A typical, Caterina can explain you this very well. And so for the elements, masonry wall, if you look at this facade, you can recognize probably different types. And these different types are, have their characteristics. I don't know what is your knowledge, your expertise in this field. So it is useless to go in detail. Probably you can go in detail on field, but take into account that, look, this mason that would appear more or less the same. They are really different. And they can tell us of different transformation of the building. And they can tell us also of what I was calling the good way of talking language. Look at how the jumps of the door are strictly connected. Look at the way in which the corner is done. The vaults are really astonishing here in Poggioreale. Very thin vaults that obviously have a problem. Thin vaults are very unstable, and so they need some bracing systems that are counter vaults built on the external, or they are small masonry buttresses or something else. Masonry buttresses here. Elements, and then we have connections, metal tie rods usually. Obviously here there is nothing peculiar, but anyway, the way to embed the tie rod under the plaster is, again, can be referred as a peculiarity of the whole. Thank you.